That'll be upstairs. The exhibit will be upstairs, and we are all really excited about it and looking forward to it. And then finally, I hope that you'll be back here with us next week for History's Lunch when Dr. Ralph Didlake will discuss the Asylum Hill project at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. Today, we are delighted to welcome Kathryn Etre, who will present Preserving the Past, What is Conservation? Kathryn Etre earned her BA from Boston University with majors in history, archaeology, and classic civilizations, and an MS in conservation for archaeology and museums from the Institute of Archaeology of University College London. From 2007 to 2010, she was an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow at the Detroit Institute of Arts and Assistant Conservator at Emory University's Michael C. Carlos Museum from 2010 to 2016. Etre was Site Conservator at Malquata, Egypt in 2013 and at Oglanquala, Azerbaijan in 2015. She's a professional associate of the American Institute for the Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works and has published in the Journal of the American Institute for Conservation. Help me welcome Kathryn Etre.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yes? All right. So we'll do a little bit of corrections for Chris. So it's Malquata and Olangala. You got almost Malquata was almost right. Close enough. All right, so we're going to start off I like to call this slide my first introduction into vanity. As you can probably tell by most of these pictures, I don't really like getting my picture taken, which is why I'm never looking at the camera. So I'm not going to talk about any of these objects except for that one. So just FYI. All right, so what is conservation? So I like to describe conservation as being like doctors of the artwork. So we're the ones who stabilize them, make sure that you can aesthetically appreciate them, make them look pretty. But we treat really anything that anyone finds important, whether that is an institution or yourself. Let's see, what else did I put there? And so part of this work will include preventive conservation. Think preventive medicine. It's you're making sure that your body, the body that you're keeping your artifacts in, is stable. We do examination documentation. Everything is thoroughly examined before treatment occurs, and you document everything, both with photo documentation and with written word. Do research. Usually this is more, think of forensic science. So you do all sorts of the fancy tools, whether microscopy under the microscope or with the fancy laser gun type things. And as most people think, and treatment. And this is basically what I'm going to talk about doing my public outreach, except for documentation, because that's boring and no one wants to see it. But everything's documented. But I always like to say, so we are conservators. A lot of publications, usually by the news, call us conservationists. Conservationists deal with the environment. So as my friends and I came up with this, we do pots, not pandas. And so again, what do we treat? Again, anything. So whether they are World Heritage sites like the Great Pyramids, or you're treating scientific artifacts like your first light bulb, or things of national importance like our Constitution. Things that are more artistic. So this is the self-portrait of Van Gogh, and we're going to put in a little plug. There's going to be an exhibit that's opening, I think it's April 4th, at the Art Museum called, and I wrote this down and forgot my notebook. It's all about the Impressionists, so Van Gogh and Degas and Monet, and I think that was basically the title. So you have things of regional importance and buildings like our Windsor ruins, things that are cultural, and in our case, also regional, little Kermie there, and things that are personal. So that is actually my grandparents' wedding portrait. And so again, I bring this back to the medicine side. So what do conservators treat? We tend to specialize. Again, think of medical school. So you wouldn't want your cardiologist can probably fix a simple break of your arm, but if you have a compound fracture, you want the orthopedist. So we will specialize in these areas between paintings, textiles, photographs, paper, buildings, or objects, and I am an objects conservator. So I do anything 3D. I can do little bits of other things, again, your little simple fracture, but anything intense, we send things out to contract conservators. And where do we work? Well, we can work in museums, like here, as you can see, picture of outside. We can work in the field, and that is a picture of me at Melkata. And Melkata is the palace of Amenhotep III, which is the 13th century BC. And this is on the west bank of the Nile, sort of near where the Valley of the Kings is. Or you can work in private practice. And to get into school, it is actually really intense. So most of us will have an undergraduate degree in the humanities, whether it's art history or archaeology, sometimes it's fine arts. Mine is in mainly archaeology and art history. You have to have graded studio art classes. You have to make sure that we call them hand skills, that your hands can actually do the work without trembling, without making mistakes. You have to have a background in science. For the schools in particular, they want both chemistry and organic chem. So you have to understand what you're doing, how that's going to affect chemically what you're touching. I also think biology is really important. So you need to, again, understand how things are breaking down. A really great example is our canoe, the first object you walk into the History Museum. And Joe very nicely helps me with that, Joe Miles Seeley. So that is a waterlogged object. And so you need to, as a conservator, need to understand what is happening, why that's been sitting in the water so long. It actually broke down the structure of the wood cells, and you have to replace what is broken down so that your canoe does not shrink. And then you do lots of practical experience. In order to get into graduate school, you need 400 hours of pre-program experience. You're also usually doing internships during the summer, during graduate school, and then a third-year internship. There are 4 graduate schools in the US. I actually chose to go to the UK. If anyone really wants to know why, we can discuss that later. No bad reason. But. All right, so we're going to start off bringing this down. So preventive conservation, again, it's controlling the environment that your object is sitting in. So if you keep your object really highly lit, if it's in an environment that is too dry or too humid, it's really going to be affected. I know a lot of complaints in museums is that it's too cold. Objects don't have temperature control. So we can put sweaters on, our objects can't. And then the other complaint is that it's too dark. Light can do a lot of damage, and it's irreversible. So that's why the lights are very dim. So these things will, again, include that you're handling that object properly, that you're not taking your very fragile object and swinging it around, that it's packed properly. You'll see images later on that we are slowly, after moving out of, as I nicely term it, the concrete cube of the Capers building, into this lovely space, and tons of space to spread out to make sure that they're now properly housed. Again, you have to make sure you know what your environment is. We have monitors throughout the museum to check what the temperature and the humidity is, as well as to check for insects, and to make sure that if the worst case scenario happens, like Hurricane Katrina again, that we know how we can save our objects. So these are just a couple of things. Same with the environment. Humans cause the most damage. Things break all the time. The image on the right is actually a piece of silver. Actually, that would be my left, your right. I don't always wear gloves, but anytime I'm handling metal, you always will see me wearing gloves, because what will happen is that the oils on your hands will actually etch the metal. And that's what you can see, the rings of someone's fingerprint that are actually etched into the metal, permanently there. And so this is a semi-recent example. So this is from our lovely library at the old Capitol Museum, where lovely visitors can reach over the barrier, and from what I've been told, like to make sure that the books are real. They are real, and when you pull them off the shelf, this is what happens. And so those have been fixed. They're back on the shelf. Hopefully all of those books look nice and pretty now. But no touching. People love to touch things. Don't touch. And this is, again, human problems. So this has been nicely termed as Monkey Jesus. This is a fresco. This happened a couple of years ago. It's a fresco from a church in Spain. And what had happened is you can see that the paint was actually flaking off. It was in pretty bad shape. And they had actually hired a conservator to come in and treat all of these. But some very helpful woman had decided before that she wanted to make it look pretty before the conservator came. And oops, go back. That is what you end up with. So this is unfortunately what it looks now, because again, of the not understanding what you're doing, you're using the wrong materials, and that paint is irreversible. They cannot get that off without causing permanent damage to that painting. So we are now stuck with Monkey Jesus, which from what I looked when I was making sure I knew what I was talking about before I came up, I was looking at it, there's actually people who now go on pilgrimages just because they find Monkey Jesus really interesting. It's kind of amusing, but a little sad. And so this is an example closer to home. So if you want to go spend time in the History Museum, you can go. This is on the second floor in that curved exhibit case right before you go into the exhibits talking about the Civil War. So this is a prosthetic leg. And someone, before it came into the museum, it wasn't us, we didn't do it. Someone decided to fix all of the breaks with what I believe is car body filler. So not only is that stronger than the material, you never want to pick something that's stronger than what you're fixing, because if it breaks, you want what you did to break, not the original artifact. But again, this is irreversible. It was very hard to get off. The best I could do was to soften it and scrape it down and then paint it to match, so that you are focusing not on the lovely car body filler and repair, but you are focusing on the artifact itself. You're letting its past speak to you, not the more present. Its past as a prosthetic leg, not its present as a car body filler mess. So that's its before and after photo. So again, you can see this is part of our documentation where everything has a scale, usually, and the object number. Okay. So again, storage, everything, this is what our storage looks now. We're making everything look nice and pretty in housing. And I would just thank to Sue, who is here, who has helped us with this. And this is actually, so you're gonna start seeing objects that have my nice little martini glass in the bottom. These are objects that you'll see in the Mississippi Distilled exhibit. So this is the storage for this wine bottle. It is actually stored in a refrigerator, a very fancy-dancy, expensive refrigerator that doesn't frost over. Try to prevent things from growing. It still has the wine inside. To try to prevent things from growing inside that wine, which we'll discuss in a little bit. And part of this, too, is having things well supported. And this will include on exhibit. So this is me working with a mount maker. His name is Jim Storm, and that was when I was in Detroit. So we are mounting a stucco figurine, which we very nicely called Stucco Man. And this is, again, for the Distilled exhibit here. These are 3 dresses, both from this is not how they're going to be displayed, we were just trying it out. So the Victorian age, Edwardian, and the 1920s. And so we buy very fancy mannequins, but because women, with all of the joys of the undergarments during that area, had very different bodies. So you have to chop these mannequins down to actually fit what you're putting on it. And so Barbara McClendon, who helped me with this, is one of our mount makers, exhibit team, had to make, for example, the shoulders bigger to just sport that really heavy sequined dress. And for our lovely Edwardian lady, she's actually smaller than she looks. She's tiny. I think she has something like a 20-inch waist. So very small, I have to chop it down. But then I have to do things like add. You'll see here that there is a strap. So what I've done is I've sewn in these straps so that all of the weight, and it's pinned to the shoulders, so that all of the weight is not pulling on that really fragile lace. It's actually kind of giving it suspenders to pull up the weight, to even up the weight. And it'll be, for example, this Victorian walking dress had to make her a bustle. So you see a little bustle that I've made for her to really support that dress. So again, reasons why it's dim. So this is at the Welty House. This is what it looks like right now. that's what it should look like. So not only do you have the fading of this poster, but things can also darken with too bright lights. So you can see that the matte darkened a lot. So it actually has a new non-acidic, properly, let's not destroy the poster, matte that we put on it. But you can see here, this is what the matte used to cover. So you can see that it was actually red at one point. So this is why now the Weldy house has UV filters on all the lights, and we keep the shades down when no one is in there. So this is mainly talking about RH, the humidity, how much humidity the air can hold at certain temperatures. If it is too high, you can have things happen like this. That is a book that has been heavily distorted because it was too wet. You can have mold growing in artifacts. Or you can have metal starting to corrode, which you can see a little bit here. And again, this is on display, this artifact. This is on the bottom floor in the 19-teens, glass case in the front. And then if it's too dry, you're gonna have things that start to crack. This is especially for your organics, so your wood, your paper, your clothing. While the animal, the wood, the tree was still alive, it can deal with that changes because it's alive and it's replacing the cells, sort of like your skin getting dry during the winter. But once you chop it down and turn it into things, it can't do that anymore. The other thing that we do is insects. You'll actually see, if you look really carefully, we have traps for insects all over the museum. But before they get here and are in a hopefully non-insect environment, and the South is really great for keeping all of those insects alive because we don't have the cold weather to kill them off. You're going to start having things to eat. So this is one of the whoops, wrong way. Go that way, go back. So you can see here the edge of that label that has been eaten, and then the hat that has been eaten as well. So this is, preventive conservation is what I usually advise people to do for themselves. And these are great websites, if anyone's interested. So we have the American Institute of Conservation website, which is here, and they have all of these different categories of caring for your own collection. The Canadian Conservation Institute, their notes is also wonderful, and the conservograms from the National Park Service is really helpful. And for a book, this Caring for Your Treasures is one of the better ones, and you can get that on Amazon, which is why the image is so blurry. But if you need a more intense help, you can go to the AIC website, and you go to that bracket that says Find an Expert. And that will lead you to an area where you can find a conservator to help you out, either whether it's just an email and they can give you some advice, or to actually physically treat. And the only people who are allowed to be on that website are those who are peer-reviewed. And so that's what I have. It's you either a professional associate, or when you've been in the field for a really long time, you can become a fellow. So those are the only two groups that you'll find under there. So ones who have been kind of proven in the field. So this is more of the, again, the next step doing to the investigation or the research. So these are all the different type of things that we can do, either with magnification. Right here I'm doing elemental analysis, and I'm actually proving the authenticity. This is fake, by the way. We found that out. And actually the designer of this machine actually designed it to look like a phaser from Star Trek. Okay. And then you can use different types of light as well. But the ones I'm really going to focus on are explaining the manufacturing techniques and testing the materials. So the first one is this. This is a project that I did at my last job. So I was focusing on these pottery. It's from this area of Panama, the Cocle region. And they have this very unusual purple pigment. Unlike other areas, the other areas, their purple is a little more red, and this purple is very unusually more blue. And we don't see it anywhere else except for this small little area in Panama. And it's never been studied. And so the curator at the time wanted me to figure out why it looked like this. So I did some analysis. I was trying to figure out the firing temperature. And this up here, you're looking at the clay minerals. And clay minerals will disappear and form at different temperatures. And so I could figure out that these pots were fired anywhere between 600 to 860 Celsius. And then I was doing little samples of that purple pigment. And when we take samples, they are no bigger than the size of a pen dot. They're tiny. The real scientists don't like us because they like to have numerous samples and they test and test and test. We're like, you can have this crumb. So they're usually not happy. And then I was doing experimental archaeology. I love this photo. What I was doing is creating what's called a reducing kiln. So it's a kiln that has no oxygen. Modern kilns, electric kilns, the way it's built, you can't get rid of the oxygen. And so I made it in this little pit fire. But I love this because I'm actually in the loading dock of the museum. That's why I find it amusing. And so I found out that it's not a reducing atmosphere, which is this example. It's actually being fired at a really high heat. But if you're really interested, you can look at this. This is actually a YouTube video. So it's out there. If you're really interested, you can go and look. The other thing that we do is we investigate, we test different ways to display things. Sorry, this is in German, but it's the best one I could find. This is something that's called an Audi test. What you do is you take material that you're going to use in your exhibit cases, you put in these little pieces of metal, and then you put it in an oven. You're trying to force a reaction, trying to see if what you're going to plan on using is going to cause damage. And then this is the article from JAIC, the Journal of American Institute for Conservation, which was using magnetic paint to hang textiles. So we'll talk about this. So this is doing treatment methodology. There's a lot of new technology coming out. So this is testing using, stop going fast. This one, testing 3D printers and 3D scanners. But the more important one for here is this lovely champagne bottle. So this champagne bottle was purchased the night Mississippi went dry and was never opened. It was saved, probably in a basement somewhere, by one of the couples that went to this dinner party. And then their daughter donated it to us back in the 70s, if I remember correctly. But unfortunately, especially after Hurricane Katrina, when we opened its box, we found that it was growing. It's a little hard to see, but if you can see it, it's right there, and it kind of goes down. It looked like a monster out of the deep. That's what I usually called it. It was this hard, gelatinous thing that is in this sealed container. And what I believe it is, I'm pretty certain what it is, it's called a vinegar mother. So it is a cellulose and bacteria mass that can grow on your wine if you leave it out for too long uncovered for some reason in the heat. And it will turn the alcohol into vinegar. And so that's what happened. Probably the cork of the poor champagne bottle dried out and it could get the bacteria inside. And it will keep on growing and producing even at, I think it's 65 degrees Fahrenheit. We keep the museum at 70. So you can see that it's really hard to stop. So it too, like the other one, is kept in the fridge when it's not on display. And it is going on display. So I was trying to figure out not only how to get more liquid in here, because a lot of the liquid evaporated off. It doesn't look like how it should have been. But how to keep that thing from stop growing. So I created a little experiment. So there's my sample of vinegar mother I bought from Etsy. Love Etsy, they're great. And then I was trying different ways that I could think of to kill bacteria in particular. So I used heat. I actually took my little sample and stuck it in boiling water. That didn't do anything. Didn't want to do too hot because that would crack the glass. Use ammonium hydroxide, that's to raise the pH. So the vinegar is acidic, we have to make it positive. Using alcohol, so isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, is one of the best things to kill mold and bacteria. Bleach, by the way, will just make it white. There's my health coronavirus info for you for today. Hydrogen peroxide, bleach, again, it made it white. Then I was using an antibiotic. So the one I chose actually is called ChemiClean. it is meant for fish tanks. So I thought, it's okay for fish, it will be okay for my artifact. Well, let's try this one. And you can get it without having a prescription from your doctor. You can get it at PetSmart, I believe, if you really want one. And then I tried cellulase, so it eats the cellulose. So this is the ChemiClean. It didn't work by itself, but this is actually both of them because I got frustrated with no one working and I just dumped the other one in it. So I don't have a picture of just the one. And the combination works, which makes sense, because you have one, again, the vinegar mother is cellulose and bacteria. You have one to eat the cellulose, one to kill the bacteria. But then I had to test it out, so I took these samples and I did it's called accelerated aging. You stick it in an oven and you force reactions, again, sort of like that Adi test. Making sure that this isn't going to damage the glass. You can see there's little fragments of glass. So I went to the old House Depot and smashed one that I bought. That was very similar. That's the neck from that, by the way. And then made sure that this is probably about 1,000 times magnification, that it didn't cause any damage. And then down here, this is the elements. And so if you look, there's actually 7 of these elemental maps overlaid over each other, and they're all the same. That means they cause no damage. And then I had to practice the right angle, because if you know champagne bottles, they have those little cages on the top. And so you can't stick a needle straight down. You can't put it kind of next to the cork because it has that little mushroom shape. Complicated things. So I had to test that out. And then I sacrificed myself, you all. I had to test it for real and put in blue food dye into champagne bottles, and then, of course, had to drink them. But, you know. So all of this experiment was actually, I made a poster for the last year's American Institute of Conservation conference, and this is it now. So it sort of worked. It definitely killed it. It is not completely gone. I think it's because it was huge. And there's only so much stuff I could inject down through the cork. But this is actually a lot of particulate matter, so like crud that you find in the bottom of your dishwasher. So it's nothing holding it together, nothing that's going to keep on growing, and it's now hidden by the label, so it can go on display and look pretty. All right, so now we're going to go to what most people think of actually hands-on fixing stuff. I love quotes and cartoons, that's how you see this. So again, actually treating an object is a lot like surgery. You only do it when you have to. If you don't have to, you leave it alone. But these are the different types of treatments. A lot of times you're doing all of them to one object. But I'm going to try to break down and show you examples of these different types. So we have first is cleaning. So this is both removing corrosion products that are hiding any of your details. So you have here, this is a Confederate belt buckle, I think. Actually, I think that's actually Union. Yeah, that's Union. It's a belt buckle from the Civil War. There we go. Union belt buckle that you can see. You can't really see the emblem very well. It's very hidden by the corrosion products. How did I? There we go. But that's it cleaned. So you can remove those corrosion products down to that layer, the original layer, that is now green, but it's still the original layer. It's usually much harder than everything else. And then just simple cleaning. So this is, again, an object that you'll see at Mississippi Distilled. It's actually a medicine kit, and they're talking about the use of alcohol in medicine, snake oil. And it was filthy, you can see here. The other issue with it is that stuff had spilled, and we'll talk about that in a bit because it didn't show. So cleaning, again, has to be very delicate. So you'll see a lot of websites advising you to dunk it in Coca-Cola, your metal objects, Coca-Cola and acids. And what you're doing is you have no control. So I might use an acid to make something soft so that I can remove it with a scalpel. But if you just stick it in acid, no control, and you're going to end up with something like this. So that's a Viking sword. They're not supposed to look like lace. But by sticking it in an acid, it's eaten through wherever it was really heavily corroded. And sometimes some of the stuff that is on your artifacts is actually important. So this artifact is African. I can't remember the group because I didn't actually treat this, but it was at my last museum. And you can see all of the material that has been laid on top of it, and that's what was done ritually. So that's a really important part of this artifact, and you would never want to remove that, because the importance of this object, although it's gorgeous, was the fact that it was ritually used. There you go. So we'll go more into this. So this is the 4 photos of that poor medicine kit. So you can see lots of crud on the top, and this lovely chewing gum that is stuck to the top of it. And the inside is kind of a mess. And it's a little, you can't see it here, but this one and that one were eaten by insects. So the way we kill insects here is I freeze them. You put them in a really cold freezer, and they die. We don't use pesticides because you never know what those pesticides are going to do over time. So we don't want to add stuff to it. And then 2, stuff has spilled, so there's crystals of stuff everywhere. And the concern with the crystals, I keep on jumping ahead. This is the after it was cleaned. Much better, it looks a little shinier. Still looks used, but not abused. And then the after photo of everything cleaned up in there. And this object was actually treated a little more. It was ripped and torn and tattered, and so now it's actually a bag. There's the image I was looking for. So when things spill, it can actually, what happened is that the wood was actually almost burned by the chemicals that were spilled. That's why it's so dark. That's just from whatever spilled in there. And so by trying to stabilize that, and this is the next step we're talking about, stabilize that is to make sure that this is still existing into the future. Again, stabilization. So to stabilize something, you have to remove whatever is causing damage. This is either from what someone has done to this, like this poor artifact, or just by age. So for example, this slot machine, which you'll see in Distilled, it's a little difficult to see, which is why I don't have an after photo of this for you. But the paint was actually lifting, so you can see all of the edges of every paint loss kind of standing like this. And that would start falling off, or if you touched it to move it, to put it on display, you would catch it. So all of that was laid back down. But then you have this poor object. So this is a close-up of the back, and this is caused by salt. So if you have an object that you're putting salt water in, or it was buried near the sea, salt, when you're in solution, salt water is thin. It can go in anywhere. But when it dries out, those salt crystals start forming. And it's going to push the surface off like this. And you add doubly to this is that someone saw this happening and decided that they were going to try to stop it. And so they put something on top that stayed sticky. So that's why it looks so dark, is because it was still picking up dirt. And because it was so heavy, it was actually trapping those salt crystals behind that layer. So it was when the salt crystals formed, you had your layer that it couldn't go through, and it would just pop off entire sections. So you had to soak them out. So to remove the salts go back down in water if you put them in water, to soak them out. And actually to test this, I find this really funny because this is actually a horse feed bucket. So I'm putting the horse pot in a horse feed bucket. I find that amusing. To test this, what you can do is, there you go. That is a conductivity meter. Salt water will carry electricity more than plain water. So do not be near the ocean during a lightning storm. And you can test how conductive that water is, how much salt you're getting out of that pot, and if you need to keep on going by testing the conductivity over time. And this actually took 3 months to get all the salt out. It was fun. But that's what it looks like after. So it's cleaned, put back together, stable, not covered with white. And this was actually part of a Arts ATL article as well as a NPR broadcast. And two, if you want to see more about this too is another YouTube video that you're allowed to see. They're a little long. They're meant for college students, so they're a little talky. But Okay, so the next is reshaping. Again, this tends to be for organics. When you put things in an uncontrolled environment, they're going to start breaking. So this one I'm not going to talk about too much, but this is in distilled. But this is a horn. And when horn gets too dry, it can start to do something called delaminate. So you can see these little bits sticking out. Because what horn is actually you have little hairs that are all kind of glued together. And when it gets too dry, that glue holding the hairs together is going to break. And so you have the hairs kind of sticking out. So I had to reshape that and stick it back down. So it looked prettier and it would not continue to happen because you have one sticking out and it's just going to keep on kind of falling. But this is a better example. This is from Detroit. So I don't know if you've noticed any object that's not from here will have where it's from, so this is the Detroit Institute of Arts, and its object number by it. So this is a little birch bark box. It's your tongue twister for you of the day. It's about this big. It was made for the tourist trade by the Ojibwa tribe, which is near the Great Lakes. But you can see here where it got too dry and it broke. It also has the additional issue of all of this was eaten by insects. So it has to be humidified, reshapen, flattened out. So those are your before and after photos, both it cleaned and reshaped. All of the quills back in place. So that's it, reshaping. You introduce humidity and you kind of force it back to where it should be. A lot of these objects have sort of object memory. It's like once it got there and you let it sit there for a while, I'm like, I remember this. I like to stay here. We're going to stay here now. And once you keep it at a proper environment, it will stay. And then I also had to make my own quills. So this is actually just paper that are rolled really tight that I could attach to the ends of those free-floating quills because a lot of them were missing parts, and so you needed something to attach to them so that they could stick back down. So again, those are the before and after. Weird noises going on. They are working on the Mississippi Distilled exhibit upstairs. That might be where it's from. So again, it's little martini glasses here. This is from Mississippi Distilled. This is that wine bottle that you saw in the box that was in the refrigerator. We're not quite sure what happened to it. Either they this is from the 70s, so it's not overly old. But the shrink wrap that they put on the top to seal that cork in, either it was put on too tight or it shrunk somehow. And so it was completely not attached. And so what is behind here is a type of fabric that is strong that kind of holds it together. Because before it was sort of springing out like an A-line skirt almost. That's sort of what it looked like. The cork had also shrunk with this one, so the cork is actually sealed, which I don't have a picture of. But the better example is this poor thing. So this is Governor Longino's frame. We got a call at one point, and we were told that the Capitol Police officers heard a large crash at 2 a.m. the night before. And this is what happened. The hanging hardware on the back was, again, not by us. We didn't do it. It's not our fault. Was put too close to the edge, and the wood was not strong enough there to hold it. And so one of those failed, and the whole thing came crashing down. And so this is what we found. You can see here where it's not attached. It's actually 3 frames put together, but they're not attached anymore. And you can see all of these areas of detail that is missing. And the miter joints are no longer together. A lot of them are really far apart. This is the after photo of the back. So a big part of this is that I don't think these were ever really meant to go together. They were held together by lots of nails being shot everywhere. And here, in particular, was a large gap. And so I had to do something to support that gap. So not only did I create these little hardware that is attaching everything, but there's a little fill kind of in select areas to try to hold that all together. And there's a close-up of that gap that's all along here. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch. Not very structurally sound for a fairly large portrait. So that's the after of the front. And we'll go into details. So this is the before, after it broke, laying on my lab tables. So again, you can see all these breaks here, this part shattered. You can see all of the broken bits of the decorative inlay there. So first I had to shove it all together. So put in a glue, and it was glue here. You might hear me call things an adhesive. So glue is only used for something that is actually boiled animules. This case it is actually glue. It is fish bones. But so not all glues are adhesives, but not all adhesives are glue. So adhesives are just stuff that stick things together. But this is actually a glue. So everything is glued back together and clamped in place. I had to get these large band clamps to really pull all those mitered joints in together. It still had its original nails. And because I didn't know the age of this, I would have to cut them out. I'd have to cut the nails. So I had to pull them back where they belonged. Go. And then I was trying to make it look like it should be, so it's pretty and framing this governor's portrait properly. And so I had to fill in all of the areas of white, or areas I added to replace what had been lost when it fell to the ground. So you can see it there. We're going to focus on to that one. And so what I did was copied, because it's repeating pattern. It does the same thing. You copy an area that's next to it and replace it with a different material. So that down the future, down the line, if my treatment report that said what I did to this ever gets lost, someone can look at this and be like, but that's plaster, and that was supposed to be wood. What's going on? And then it's painted to match. And again, this is done with acrylic paints, not with gilding. So it's the different materials. Although it doesn't look different, it will be different under different lighting and different analysis. So again, that's him hanging back on the wall. You can go look at him, he's back there. But doing loss compensation like that, sometimes we're doing it for a structural reason. This is that pot that I showed you at the beginning that I kind of pointed out. This is the front of it. He's a warrior and he's beautiful, supposedly, because it says kalos, which means beautiful in Greek. It's called a kilix. It was for drinking wine. But so you have some structural support, loss compensation here, to support that handle, a little bit there. And then you have some just for aesthetic reasons, sort of like filling in those missing bits of decorative carving on that frame, where this one, because it looked a little strange, you're looking down at the foot of that cup. It looked a little odd on display, and so the curator asked me to fill that back in, and then I just followed the lines of his shield, gave him a face, so he didn't look like he was erased. But the face actually is in a different color. It's actually a very dark green and not black. So again, it was trying to be, if you look really close. So I was taught in school that an educated viewer should be able to tell from 6 inches what you've added, but from 6 feet, it should look like a complete whole, that you won't be focusing on what I did, because I'm not the artist, and that's a very big, important ethical thing for conservators. Is that we're not the artists, we let them speak for themselves. And so this is it's kind of on the line of both doing loss compensation and fabrication of missing parts for this pot, because these are factory made. So you kind of know what's supposed to be there. So this is the before and after. It's called maltodextrin. Anheuser-Busch made them kind of before, during, after Prohibition, but it ramped up production during Prohibition. But it was missing most of its label, and it was really unreadable. And so I've added them. But the other important thing, too, so this is the label I found online, because Anheuser-Busch is Anheuser-Busch, and very highly collectible. These are all things about malt nutrient, which I always find funny is that it was really meant to make you fat, which is so anti what we look for now. I just find it really funny. It increased your vigor and made you pleasantly plump, I think is one of the ads said. But because of the interest of Anheuser-Busch, a lot of things are online. And so by printing off this label and resizing it, I could trace what was lost. So this is a light sheet, that's the print off. And then what I did was I traced it onto this paper and could cut out the pieces that were missing to fit exactly where they were, as well as, once that was done, place them over and sort of trace. It's a little difficult because it's not exactly aligned. The original label is a little smooshed. But to repeat what should there, because we know what should have been there from this example. But here again, your before and after, and here are the fills. There's one there, 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 and a little one there. So you can see it's here, there, little one there, and again a little one there, just to make it look readable, because you couldn't even see malt nutrient before. It was treen. But especially with fine arts museums, you get more into the fabrication of parts. And this is when you're really, in particular, working with the art historians, because they're kind of aware of what was gone. So this is the before and after photo. So not only do you have an issue with this neck, which was completely wrong, but this object had actually been used as an ashtray at one point. So when I disassembled it, when I took this apart, I dumped out this whole pile about this big of cigarette ash and ash bits and matches. So that is why you see that color difference. Just think of what that smoke tar does to the inside of your house if you know longtime smokers. Do that to your artifacts too. And again, we're looking at the curator thought there was something weird going at the neck. So this is one of the lights that we can use. It's a black light, it's a UV light. So things will glow different ways. And so we could see more in detail of all of this white stuff that was added. It can also be used to identify materials. If you see the orange lines, that usually will glow like that if you use shellac. Shellac is on your floor sometimes. It's boiled up bug bits. And then you can use elemental analysis to look at if it's all from the same object, it should have the same elements. It might be not at the same levels. That's why you see different peak heights here, different heights. But it should have the same ones. But when you're finding ones that exist in one and not the other, that's when you're like, something weird is going on. So after all of that, I took it apart. So you can see here, there's these nice rings of plaster that are holding these together. And you can see the holes, little bits of metal holding this all together. And this is that neck piece. Once I took it apart, the art historian had realized that it was actually from a different piece completely and had been put on upside down. So originally, the neck of whatever this vessel was would have gone like this and then had a wide top. Instead, they turned it back down, so it did your nice little hourglass. And when you do that, when you take old bits of lots of different things, it's called a pastiche. So if you watch Antiques Roadshow, sometimes you hear them talking about pastiches. And we weren't sure about the cup. The art historian thought it might be new, in quotations. The museum had got this piece in the 1890s, so it was new then.
What's the significance of that piece?
So this was for when that museum, the Detroit Institute of Arts, was redoing the Islamic galleries, and this is from the Seljuk dynasty in Iran from about the 1300s. So it's one of the pieces that is on display there. So putting it back together, so this is what would be considered loss compensation. And then so using that, the art historian had given me a couple of different options. And so I drew examples of them for her and then placed them on top with tracing paper. And so this was the final that she decided looked most aesthetically pleasing. And again, the after. And so what that is actually is our mount maker had spun this for me on a lathe, and then I cast it, made a mold of it, and made it into plaster. And so it's plaster, not ceramic, not fired, and it's painted, which you get close to it, you can tell that it's hand painted and not a glaze that is on it. But is here before decisions, before and after. So this, I think part of this was quoted in what the coming here to talk to me, it was a quote. This is one of my favorite conservation quotes, and I use it at the end of almost all of my talks because I think it's fun. But it's, as you all know, that's why you're here, that's why you come to these talks, that's why you support this museum, that the past is important. And if you kind of willy-nilly do what you want and not understanding what the object is that the person is treating, you can get rid of a lot of that history. And the history, written history is written by the victors. It can be highly biased. These artifacts are not like that. Whatever we're doing to it, even if that neck is considered biased in the future, it's removable. It's very obvious it's not part of the original. It can be reinterpreted, but you still have that artifact because it's been saved. But Chris, how are we doing on time? Good? Okay, good, because I didn't, so I have the tendency, so I'm from up north, and I've been told I talk really fast. So for what I thought was going to be a good time, I didn't want to make sure I wasn't tripping you. So we'll leave it at that. So this is the lab before we had all of the stuff added to it, so that's why I'm still wearing a hard hat. So I'm
for a few
more than
questions.
happy to take questions, and Chris has the microphone.
Great presentation, and you are obviously well qualified for this work.
Thank you.
The historical significance of a lot of our history has been lost
Yes.
because of a lack of knowledge and also a lack of appreciation.
Right.
One of your points was public outreach. What are the professional conservators doing to educate the public and also the public schools on recognizing what's important and trying to reclaim that history that has been ignored and lost?
Right. So a lot of times you're not paid for public outreach, so there's only so much we can do, unfortunately, especially if you're in private practice. But there is a lot of like this, that speaking to groups, and I'm actually asked Chris if I can be part of the Speakers Bureau, is that what it's called? So that I can go out and talk to different groups about taking care of their artifacts. At my last job, actually, my boss and I created teacher workshops that we could use conservation principles to teach science in particular. And so we worked with a local teacher, created these experiments, and had a workshop to create what they were using at that time called problem-based learning units. Kind of like a solve your own crime type thing. And so it was trying to get that introduced into schools. So those are little things that we try to do.
Hi. There are so many people who are not interested. They don't care. And when she mentioned the public schools, I figured that's the best place to begin. Yes. to help train the children to be interested and to follow the history. But have you had experiences with these kinds of attitudes?
With not appreciating history?
Not caring.
Not caring. Yeah, you get that a lot. You get it especially when people are unwilling to pay. I do a little bit of private work, not a lot, but I've had people come to me before who, what do you mean that you are charging? So typical ranges are anywhere between about $80 to $150 an hour. Usually my minimum I'll charge is an hour and a half, because that's time to review and do minor treatments. The unwillingness to pay that. It's like, what do you mean you're charging me to fix that? My old boss used to love to say that, well, you're willing to pay your plumber that cost to come and unplug your toilet. You know, why aren't you willing to pay the same amount to fix your artwork? And then two, I have unfortunately had to deal with a couple of artifacts that have been purposely damaged by visitors to museums. And the, like, well, you can just get a new one, or the, I don't care, you know, that's why we pay you. I did get told that at one point when I told a gentleman that he wasn't allowed to pet this painting at one point. It's like, well, I paid to get in here, I should be able to do what I want. So yes, it's the trying to keep your temper and educate them at the same time where you're internally wanting to throttle them.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Maybe.
Probably close. Okay. So for you, what's been probably your most challenging piece to restore, and what's been your favorite piece to restore?
I actually brought slides of my favorite artifacts, because that's a common question, and maybe we can do that at the end. Challenging is probably that, it's called a Pyxis. It's the one that has the horses on the top. That's been my most difficult, because it was dealing with what they did and taking it apart. Actually, what we did to it is called consolidation, where you take an adhesive and you water it down. So it's very, very thin, but you're trying to strengthen an artifact. So doing that and making sure it wasn't staining and soaking it, and I was going in on weekends to change the water. And so yeah, they become your babies when you've had those artifacts for so long. But, yeah. So we'll show the favorite objects.
We have come to the top of another hour. Thank you all for being with us today. I hope that we will see you at some of the events that we have coming up back here next week for Ralph Didlake's talk on the Asylum Hill project. Thank you again for braving the weather today, and help me thank Kathryn Etre for this fabulous program.